So in this video, I'm going to explain exactly how Spanish verbs work and without any memorization. My name is Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in 4 languages including Spanish. I got fluent in Spanish at 13 years old in 120 hours of studying, and now I help obsessed Spanish learners reach conversational fluency with my simple methods. Here's my quick before and after of a client.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español. Quiero aprender español. Pues para mí me gusta jugar el aeroclip para aprender español, así que ya lo sé la palabra del aeroclip.
And so these are the 4 points that we're going to go through. So the first is what are verbs? So what even are verbs, right? Second is the verb endings. So what are the endings? And then we're going to end off with a free gift if you make it to the end. Okay, so let's start. What are verbs? So maybe you've been on this journey of learning Spanish and you've heard of this thing called verbs, okay? And maybe growing up you also heard about this thing, verbs, because it is a sort of a well-known thing that we learn as kids, okay? But when it comes to Spanish, you might have heard of, verbs and conjugations and these different things. But have you ever stopped to think like, okay, what actually are verbs? What is a way to define verbs, okay? Now, I remember when I first started learning grammar and getting into grammar, right? Getting into learning Spanish, I used an app called Language Transfer. And so the way I got introduced to verbs themselves was sort of different. Even though, I sort of knew what a verb was, there was a nice explanation that I had gotten, and it's what I sort of used as my base. And that's what I want to start with. Spanish verbs are like the base of the entirety of grammar, okay? Grammar is like the logic behind how we create sentences. And verbs are like the main part of grammar, okay? And so knowing what verbs are is an essential part of that. So simply put, verbs can be defined as words that we can put to before of, okay? So this is like the simplest way to teach this, okay? Now, there's many different ways to talk about it. This is just the simplest way that I like to teach people, okay? And this is, from what I can see, the best way to explain it. So you can't say to laptop, right? That doesn't make sense, to laptop. So laptop isn't a verb then, okay? Now, if you know what that is, it is a noun, okay? So a noun is just a thing, but we're just talking about verbs right now. However, you can say to run. So then run is a verb, okay? That is the simplest explanation. So basically, anything that you can do is a verb, basically, okay? Now, that is the simplest way that I like to explain it, okay? If you can put to before that word and it makes sense as though it's something that you can do, right? Then it's a verb. So let me ask you here. Is to fall a verb? Yes, it is a verb because it is something that you can do. Is to paper a word? No, paper is a noun. Now, sometimes verbs and nouns can both be the same thing. So, for example, to book, okay? A book is a book, but you can also book something, like booking a hotel. Or, for example, to watch. A watch is something that you wear. I don't have a watch on. But it could also be a verb, to watch, like I'm watching something. But just so you know, if you can put to before it, then it's a verb, okay? And verbs can also be nouns, and words can be both nouns and verbs, which is pretty interesting, okay? So that's what a verb is, okay? Now, one quick tip here is, when you are thinking about verbs, okay, you always want to think that a verb is a word that is to and then the word. So people think that run, if you just think that run is a verb, that's going to confuse you, okay? I found this in my own Spanish learning journey. Whereas what we should do is translate the verb to run as to run, okay? So you always want to put to before a verb when you're thinking about it in Spanish, okay? That's just a very quick tip, but it matters a lot. Because in Spanish, 99% of times, and when you have a verb, like for example, hablar, then hablar is always going to be translated to speak, not just speak, okay? That is a super important point. I will repeat myself. Always translate verbs as the to and then the blank verb, okay? Always want to follow this framework when it comes to verbs, okay? To blank verb, okay? Okay, so those are verbs, okay? Verbs are words that involve actions, things that we do. So basically words that we can put to before of, okay? Now, in Spanish, now we're switching over to Spanish. So that was English, okay? Just what are verbs? Now we're talking about Spanish. In English, verbs are just like to eat, to speak, to do whatever, okay? In Spanish, they're separated into different endings of words. Okay, so let's talk about this. So usually people have like charts of this, which I find super annoying, and it's also it involves memorization. Okay, again, I am super against memorization. This entire channel is about learning Spanish without memorization. So I'm just going to teach you the rules for this, which is all you really need. Okay, if you've done any research into this, you probably know this, but we're just going to go through very quickly. In Spanish, if a word ends in either ar, or ir, it will be a verb, meaning any word that you see in Spanish, basically 99.99% of words, if they end in ar or ir, it's a verb, meaning it's something that you do, okay? And so here's the distinction though. Even though there are 3 verb endings, there are only 2 groups of verbs. A lot of people online, they act like they don't teach it in this way, like in school especially. They teach it as 3 individual units that you have to memorize. That isn't true, okay? To simplify it, it is actually only 2 groups. So the groups are ar, verbs, so words that end in ar, and then words that end in or ir, okay? So it's /ir. So verbs either end in ar, or ir, okay? And they are separated into 2 groups. So all you have to recognize is, if it ends in ar, then it falls into this group. And if it ends in ir or then it falls into this group. Okay, that is all we need to know. Okay, so that is the base principle, okay? Any word that you see ending in ar, or ir will be a verb, and if it ends in ar, then it's in the group of ar verbs, and if it ends in or ir, then it's in the group of erid verbs, okay? That is the simplest. So let's give some examples, okay? The verb to speak, and remember, we're not just calling it speak, we're calling it to speak, is hablar. So you can see this ends in ar, so this falls into this group, okay? The verb to come is venir, okay? So like to go somewhere, like to come as in to arrive. So this will fall into this group, okay? The verb to eat is comer. Which group do you think that's going to fall into? This group, right? Because it ends in Very, very simple, right? Now, here is why this all matters, okay? So now we're going to talk about exactly how do verbs work, okay? So this is something called conjugation, and people complicate this a lot. I'm going to give you the simplest explanation ever, okay? And it's all based on what we've been doing so far. So first, let's define conjugation. So conjugation is basically using the verb ending in order to replace it with something or add something in order to change the meaning of who does the verb. So we have to speak, for example, right? To speak, or hablar. The equivalent of this in Spanish is hablar. Now, if we wanted to say I speak, in English, okay, you don't change the verb speak, which is very simple and nice, right? But you do have to clarify that it's I. So you put an I here, okay? I speak. In Spanish, instead of doing that, you take off the verb ending, and then based on whichever group the verb ending is in, the word will get rid of ar or or whatever, and then put another letter. In this case, it's o, okay? So I speak becomes hablo, for example, right? And you've probably heard of hablo español, I speak Spanish, right? So here's why these groups matter, okay? Based on the group, not the ending, but the group, that is what makes the conjugation. Meaning, if in order for us to be able to predict what the conjugation is for any verb that falls into these groups, you need to recognize that it is in the group, okay? Meaning, if a verb ends in or ir, meaning it falls into the group of or ir, then the conjugation, basically what we put to the ending, changes, okay? And ar is very simple because it's one group and it's only one ending, so it's very simple, right? And if it's in the ar group, then it will fall into that category. The mistake here that most people make, okay, is that most people separate and ir and they memorize that whole chart. That is low leverage. That means you're memorizing more things for no benefit, okay? Because and ir verbs all end in the same things, okay? And so that is how Spanish verb conjugation works. One final thing in regards to how to understand verbs is, and this is something that I don't see many people talk about, and it's absolutely crucial, okay? In Spanish, a verb, like for example, hablar, right? It means to speak, right? As we saw, but it also means speaking, okay? So any verb, if it ends in ar or ir, it will mean both to speak, so the to form, and also the ing form, the speaking form, okay? If you've heard of like voy a means I am going to, and voy is the conjugation of the verb to go. Now, voy a means I am going to, and boy just means I'm going. So there you can see it right there, right? Boy means I go, but it also means I am going. Okay, so in the present tense and the ending, it will always be the to blank verb, and it will also be the ing form at the end. Okay, and yes, this does mean that you can also think of verbs as words that end in ing. So for example, you couldn't say laptoping because it's not a verb, right? We could make up a verb like, oh, I'm Googling it, right? But you know what's interesting? In Spanish, that would be like putting ar to the ending. It would be as though googlear, which is really funny. But anyway, you couldn't have laptoping because that's not a verb, right? But you could say falling. So there's two ways to find out if a word is a verb or not. You can either put to before it or ing after it, okay? So to fall is a verb, right? Falling is also a word, right? They're both verbs and they're words. So you can be sure that to fall is a verb. And then in Spanish, if it ends in ar, er, or ir, then you know it's a verb, okay? And so in this way, if we took any Spanish verb, like for example, pedir. Pedir is to order. So pedir could mean to order and also ordering, okay? So it means both the ing and the to, okay? So these are basically like ways of recognizing verbs, okay? And that's the simplest explanation of Spanish verbs pretty much on the internet. I truly believe that this is the best way to understand Spanish verbs, okay? And, you know, do whatever you want, but personally, I got fluent in 120 hours of studying, but it's not just me. You saw the client there, he got fluent in a few months with a few hundred hours of studying as well, like 400 something, 300 something, which means according to an AI analysis of my transformation, I saved 200 to 250 hours compared to the average learner. And the client that you saw saved 200 to 350 hours. And so this way of learning, where you're simplifying it to the absolute degree, in my opinion, is the best way to learn because it has more leverage. And just a quick explanation of leverage and why this works, okay? The reason why these methods that are like simplifying things work is because you'll put in like 1 unit of effort and you'll get out like 20. And now you know the verb groups are ar and then er and ir, so there's 2 verb groups. Instead of having to memorize 3 conjugations of endings where 2 of them are basically the same, you just simplify the process by doing 1, and therefore you put in 1 unit of effort and you learn double, basically. And so this is why it has leverage, okay? It's where the effort that you put in, you get more out of it, okay? So you have leverage. And that is what makes these simple explanations much more effective than the super complicated college ones. And that's why no one who goes to college and studies Spanish or who goes to school to study Spanish is fluent in Spanish, right? You probably watching this have taken Spanish at school, you're probably not fluent, which is why you're watching this. And so now that you made it to the end, we're going to talk about the free gift that I have for you. So if you check the description, you can grab my free, easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet to instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words. And it doesn't require any email. You literally just click the link and then boom, you have it like downloaded. And so this is just my gift for reaching the end in this video. And by the way, you know how we're talking about leverage? This Cognate cheat sheet has so much leverage because you basically learn like 12 different rules or 13 different rules, and then you unlock thousands of Spanish words instantly. It's a very high leverage piece of content. So if you're interested, you can do that. Remember that these frameworks and everything I teach in these videos are just small pieces from my program. And so if you want to implement these frameworks and finally learn Spanish in a clear and structured way, then you can check the description or the pinned comment to join my program where I teach Spanish using these methods. I would recommend acting now though, because I don't know when the price may increase. So if you want to lock in your price now, then check the description to join. Otherwise, I would really appreciate it if you shared this video with someone who you think would benefit. That way, all of us benefit. You're helping your friend out, you're helping me out, and so it's just a great thing. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed and stay humble.